The Indiana Fever may have fallen to the Dallas Wings 95-80 in their second preseason matchup, but the biggest headlines came after the final buzzer, and they completely changed the mood around this team. First, Caitlin Clark exploded for 21 points in only 16 minutes of action, reminding everyone exactly how dangerous Indiana can look when she's healthy and in rhythm. Then came another huge update. Aaliyah Boston has officially been cleared to return for Saturday's game against Nigeria, so even though Dallas won the game on the scoreboard, Indiana may have walked away with something much more important, proof that this roster is getting closer to full strength at exactly the right time. Let's break down everything that happened and why Fever fans probably have far more reasons to be excited than concerned right now.
As Clark gets by Beckers and gets to the rim. Lana Smith struggled to pull it down, and it's Clark who sets sail for the other end.
The scoreboard may have read Dallas Wings 95, Indiana Fever 80, but the final result honestly felt far less important than what actually happened on the floor. Because if you watched the game closely, one thing stood out immediately. Caitlin Clark looked completely locked in. In only 16 minutes of action, Clark put up 21 points while shooting efficiently across the board. She went 4 of 6 from the field, knocked down 11 of her 13 free throws, added 4 assists, and grabbed 3 rebounds. That is not just a solid preseason performance. That is dominance in limited minutes, and it came while Indiana was missing key pieces like Aaliyah Boston and Lexi Hull. This was not even close to the Fever's full rotation. The coaching staff was experimenting with lineups, testing bench combinations, and using the preseason exactly the way it is supposed to be used, preparing the roster for the games that actually count. But Clark looked like someone already in regular season form. The hesitation and rust people noticed during Indiana's first preseason game were gone. Her tempo looked sharp, her confidence was obvious, and the offensive rhythm that makes her so dangerous fully returned. The deep shooting threat was there, the playmaking was there, and most importantly, she looked healthy. Then came the moment that instantly scared every Fever fan watching. Early in the third quarter, Clark took a hard fall after Dallas forward Alana Smith contested a three-point attempt. Smith challenged the shot aggressively and did not fully give Clark room to land safely. Clark appeared to come down awkwardly on Smith's foot, sending both players crashing to the floor. The officials immediately reviewed the sequence and upgraded the contact to a flagrant 1 foul, and for a few seconds, the entire building got quiet. Clark was visibly limping after the play. She stayed in long enough to knock down 2 of her 3 free throws, but shortly after that, she headed toward the bench and never returned to the game. That was enough to send panic through Fever fans almost instantly, because the memory of last season still feels fresh. Clark dealt with injuries throughout the year. The team tried carefully managing her health, and eventually those physical setbacks cost her a huge portion of the season. So when people saw her limping off the floor Thursday,
obviously, I thought the refs did a really good job tonight on it, actually, and that's kind of been their focus going into this season is, you know, I know there was a committee of people that really wanted them to start calling things, and I thought they did a great job of that, honestly. I thought the refs were great, and I just landed on my kneecap really hard.
Clark's fall looked painful in real time, and the way she came down immediately raised concern. She appeared to land directly on her kneecap, which explained why she was limping as she walked off the floor. No ligament issue, no tear, no major injury setback, and most importantly for Indiana, Clark was not listed on the injury report heading into Saturday's matchup against Nigeria. After the game, head coach Stephanie White explained that Indiana was already planning to manage Clark's minutes carefully during preseason action. So once she took the hard fall, the coaching staff decided there was no reason to risk pushing her any further in a game that ultimately did not matter in the standings.
And for her to come out about that time anyway, it was just extra precaution, I think, getting her out in that moment. But yeah, I mean, the plan was for her to start the third quarter and then we get her out quickly.
And honestly, the way Indiana handled the situation tells you a lot about how this organization is approaching the season. The Fever are not treating preseason games like must-win moments. They are thinking bigger than that. They are carefully managing workloads, protecting their franchise star, and making decisions with the long-term future of the team in mind instead of chasing meaningless exhibition wins. That is what smart teams do when they believe they have something real building. And if you follow the Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark, or the WNBA in general, this is exactly why the next update mattered so much. Because the second major development after the Dallas game may have been even bigger. Aaliyah Boston is officially back. After missing both preseason games while recovering from a lower leg injury, Boston has now been cleared to return for Saturday's matchup against Nigeria. She is no longer listed on the injury report and is expected to be available. That changes everything for Indiana. For the last couple of weeks, the Fever have been trying different front court combinations while Boston recovered. Monique Billings and Maisha Hines-Allen both stepped into larger roles at center, and to their credit, they competed hard and gave Indiana valuable minutes. But neither player brings what Aaliyah Boston brings to this roster. Boston is one of the league's elite front court players, a 3-time All-Star, the 2023 Rookie of the Year, and one of the foundational pieces of the Fever franchise moving forward. Last season, she averaged 15 points, 8.2 rebounds, and 3.7 assists while shooting an efficient 53.8% from the field, eventually finishing 6th in MVP voting despite Indiana dealing with injuries throughout the year. Her impact goes far beyond statistics. When Boston is on the floor, Indiana's entire identity changes. The offense becomes more balanced, the interior scoring threat opens up, and Caitlin Clark suddenly has a dominant inside partner defenses are forced to respect. The pick and roll game becomes harder to stop, the rebounding improves, and the team immediately becomes more physical in the paint. Without her, Indiana has looked smaller and less imposing during stretches of both preseason games. Stephanie White even acknowledged it after the loss to Dallas. She admitted the Wings controlled the rebounding battle, played with more physicality, and simply outworked the Fever in key moments. And a huge reason for that was Boston not being available.
I thought our urgency wasn't there. No, we let them move the ball and move themselves really wherever they wanted to. I didn't feel like we had a sense of urgency. I felt like we were disconnected on the defensive end of the floor. We weren't moving when the ball moves. And then we were standing watching. I mean, they crushed us on the glass. I thought we got out-toughed. I thought that their levels of effort or levels of urgency, I should say, was different than ours. And you know, we can't have that.
Now look ahead to Saturday's matchup against Nigeria, because this is where things start getting interesting for Indiana. Aaliyah Boston is expected back on the court. Caitlin Clark is healthy, and the Fever will have one final preseason game to tighten up rotations, build chemistry, and clean up mistakes before the regular season officially begins on May 9th. And honestly, that is exactly what preseason basketball is supposed to accomplish, which is why the loss to Dallas really is not the main story here. The important takeaway is that Clark looked explosive and efficient in limited minutes. The important takeaway is that Boston has been cleared to return, and maybe most importantly, Indiana now gets additional practice time after Saturday's game to prepare for their regular season opener, which just happens to be another matchup against this same Dallas Wings team. But the next meeting should look completely different. Boston will likely be back anchoring the paint. Lexi Hull is expected to return from her hamstring injury. The rotations will be more organized, roles will be clearer, and the intensity level will no longer feel like preseason basketball. And before moving on, there is another player who deserves serious attention after these first two games: Raven Johnson. The rookie guard has quietly become one of the most impressive surprises on Indiana's roster so far. Against Dallas, she played 21 minutes and finished with 3 points, 5 assists, and 5 steals. Numbers that only tell part of the story, because her impact defensively has been impossible to ignore. Johnson has consistently disrupted passing lanes, pressured ball handlers, and created transition opportunities with her activity on defense. Every time she steps onto the floor, the energy changes. And after the game, Caitlin Clark specifically spoke about Johnson's performance. And what Clark said carried real weight.
Like, I remember when I was a rookie, and the terminology is like the hardest thing to kind of understand. Like, the WNBA is a completely different style than what you play in college. And, you know, I think also coach, like, there's veterans around or people that have played in coach's system for a while, and that, like, she expects that of us to help the younger players, and that's what we're going to do, and that's what we want to do. And, you know,
this is the kind of leadership Indiana hoped Caitlin Clark would eventually grow into, and she is already showing signs of it far earlier than most players do. Clark is only 24 years old and heading into just her third WNBA season, yet she is already taking responsibility beyond her own production. She is guiding younger teammates, answering questions during games and practices, helping rookies like Raven Johnson understand the system, and setting the tone for the type of environment the Fever want to build moving forward. And that matters matters more than people realize, because Indiana is not simply trying to become a playoff team for one season. They are trying to create something sustainable, a real long-term culture where veterans help younger players develop, communication stays open, and winning matters more than individual numbers. Those things rarely show up in box scores, but they are often the difference between talented teams and championship-level teams. Now, even with all the positives surrounding Clark and Boston's return, the Dallas game still exposed several real issues Indiana has to clean up before the regular season starts. Defensively, the Fever looked disconnected at times. Offensively, there were too many possessions where players over-dribbled, forced difficult passes, or tried to create highlight plays instead of making the simple read. And on the glass, Dallas controlled the rebounding battle far too easily. Stephanie White addressed all of it honestly after the game. She admitted Dallas played with more urgency, competed harder in certain stretches, and exposed areas where Indiana simply has to improve defensively. There was no sugarcoating the performance, but at the same time, White also understands the larger picture here. This roster still has new pieces adjusting to each other, Caitlin Clark and Sophie. Cunningham both dealt with injuries last season. Rotations are still being tested. Chemistry is still developing, and the games that truly matter do not begin until May 9th. That is why Saturday's final preseason game against Nigeria becomes important. Boston returns, Clark appears healthy, and after that, Indiana gets a full week to prepare for the regular season opener against Dallas. And honestly, that rematch suddenly feels huge, because now the storyline becomes impossible to ignore. Paige Buchers and Ozzie Fudd, two #1 overall picks, beginning their WNBA journey together in Dallas. On the other side, Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston, also former #1 picks, leading an Indiana team that reached the semifinals last season. That is the kind of matchup the league wants center stage. And Thursday's preseason game already gave fans a preview. Clark finished with 21 points in just 16 minutes. Buchers answered with 20 points in 20 minutes while shooting 8 of 1-2 from the field. Both guards looked explosive, efficient, and fully capable of becoming major problems for defenses throughout the season. But when these teams meet again on May 9th, everything changes. The intensity rises, the rotations shorten, Boston will likely be back controlling the paint. Lexi Hull should return, and Indiana will finally look much closer to the full roster they expect to compete with all season long. So yes, technically the Fever lost their second preseason game to Dallas 95-80, but the bigger story coming out of the night had very little to do with the final score. Caitlin Clark looked healthy, aggressive, and dominant in limited minutes. Aaliyah, Boston was officially cleared to return, and the injury scare that briefly panicked Indiana fans ended up being far less serious than feared. Two major updates, two huge reasons for optimism, and now only 1 week remains before the games start counting for real. So what do you think? Are the preseason losses actually concerning? Or are you more focused on Clark looking fully healthy again and Boston returning to the lineup? Drop your thoughts in the comments, make sure to subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest updates on Caitlin Clark, the Indiana Fever, and everything happening around the WNBA.